Well, good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. Time to get our study underway. I've asked our brother Bill to lead us in prayer as we bow together at this time.
Our Father in heaven, we are thankful to you for that we can look to you as our Father, and that you have been so kind and merciful with us, that you've blessed us with so many things. You who are worthy of all honor, glory, and praise, you have seen fit to bless us in ways that we do not deserve. We are thankful for this. We're thankful that we have the opportunity this morning to come together and study from your word and to worship you. We're thankful for our brother Leon as he directs the class. We pray that you could be with him. We're thankful that we have your word, that we can study and know more about your will and your ways.
Okay, I'd like to say thank you to Aaron, who taught last week, and in his teaching he covered chapters 8, 9, and 10 and did not answer any questions. So he left that for me to do. So we'll start out with answering the questions, and that'll kind of review us, and then I'm prepared to cover new material from that point. Thomas, you want to help me here? I know that Gary and Janess back there will need a copy. You take any on these two sides, please, and you take any on these two sides. Raise your hand if you need a copy of 8 and 9. Now then, if you need chapter 10, raise your hand. If you need chapter 10, raise your hand. Anybody else need chapter 10? Gary, you don't have chapter 10. Is that two? Anybody else? This is really going to be 10 through 14. And then I've even got some more to pass out after that. We got all kinds of questions. Okay, what I need. How do you like that artwork, by the way? That's a pencil sketch. Does that not? I wish I were an artist sometimes. But I looked at this. All that is just black sketching, like with a pencil. But you see, do you see Job sitting in the ash heap? And do you see the way his friends are positioned there? Like they're in kind of an accusatory position, would you say? Would that be a good word? And so that's kind of the posture that we have for so much of this book. So without going into detail, the first two chapters really set the scene for the book in terms of we're going to see how much Job trusted God even when he couldn't understand. But God trusted Job. God could entrust Job with a very important assignment he couldn't entrust just to anybody. And Job doesn't even know the assignment. But God trusted Job to be what he should be in the most difficult circumstances. So when all of these terrible calamities come, we begin with Job's speech where he just basically says, it's so terrible, it's so awful, I wish. Would you be angry if I spoke a word to you? Just kind of, could I entreat you? It's a gentle kind of approach, but still he's blaming Job. And, you should just look at this. God, don't despise his chastening. And then Job responds to that in chapter 6. But in chapter 7, we see a shift in the conversation so that instead of so much answering Eliphaz, if you look along in there, in most of your translations, you're going to see capital Y's for the word you. where Job is really addressing himself to God in so much of this in chapter 7. So and then our second speaker, this is what Aaron covered last time, where Bildad basically is saying, you know, God is punishing you. He's punishing you because of your sins. And therefore, the solution is, obviously, you know, it's very obvious, you should just repent of your sins. And among the things that Job will say in response in chapter 9 is how he wished that he had a daysman. He wished that he had a mediator. The chasm he felt at this time between himself and God was so great that he just felt the need for a mediator who could mediate between him and God. Of course, that's going to be realized in Christ Jesus. Now, that's through chapter 9, and then in chapter 10, Job is going to be weary of his life. He's going to loathe his life. And this basically is just taking our chapter content and reviewing what we have covered so far. One of the things that Job does himself, as well as some of the other speakers, what kind of, Thomas, do you remember what kind of genre this is, what kind of writing this is? It's Hebrew poetry. It's written in Hebrew poetry. And that reminds me of something else I wanted to say, Bill, about a question you raised later, so don't let me forget that. But we're using poetry. Keep that in mind. But also, within that, we're also using some word pictures. Now, poetry tends to do that anyway. And you could use word pictures when you're not using poetry. But in addition to being poetry, a lot of word pictures are used. For example, we said in chapter 8 that Bildad is saying, God is punishing you. And we have expressions today, and I'm just going to say, look at a couple of word pictures, then we're going to go right into our questions. But we have expressions today. Look with me in chapter 8 and verse 11. This is in the context of Bildad saying there has to be sin. This is why you are in this condition. There's sin in your life. We use expressions like where there's smoke, there's fire. You can't, it's like, well, you see the smoke coming up, don't you? Well, if there's smoke coming up, there has to be fire. But anyway, you look at verse 11. What does verse 11 say? Thomas, what does verse 11 say?
And the papyrus grow up without a marsh, and the reeds grow without water.
That's a word picture. It's also a parallel. The papyrus is a reed. And the marsh, water, supply what's necessary. In other words, if you're in a dry place, I've been to the desert, to biblical deserts lots of times, and I've never seen papyrus growing in the desert. Out where it's dry and hot, you won't see that. But I have seen papyrus growing where there's marsh, where there is water. For example, this right here is the papyrus plant. And this is in a biblical site, by the way, that you might not think of there being papyrus. Most of the papyrus was grown in Egypt. And the earliest writing material was made from papyrus. And Egypt basically had a monopoly on that, which is another story. And that's something we'll talk about sometime in terms of the move to parchment and vellum and how God in His providence preserved His Word on the better writing material. But that's another story. But this, I said, is a biblical city. It's mentioned in Acts 28. And it's Syracuse. As Paul left Malta, he and his group, they sailed up and they went to Syracuse, which, of course, if you're in Sicily, you would say Siracusa. But here you can see the water, the sea, the Aegean Sea here. And so Siracusa is a port city, biblically speaking, and even today. But just in a little bit on the shore, you see I was noticing here some papyrus growing. In fact, there's a shop just up the street that has things made out of papyrus, you know, where they've done some painting on sheets of papyrus for like of Sicily or other things that would be of interest. So this is a word picture. So you don't want to just read over that, because Bildad is saying, if you see those plants, there's water. His point is, look at you, Job. You see this kind of suffering, there's sin. I mean, he just has one verse in his song. I mean, that's if you got sorrow, if you've got calamity, if destruction has come into your path, there's only one thing that can cause that, and that is you are sinning. And so this is a word picture. The word picture there is the papyrus. I wanted to share that with you. Yes? It does not grow in salt water.
Could that be brackish water or salt water means fresh?
It's not brackish water. It grows in water that is not salty, like the Nile River, for example. But the real thing is not the kind of water, but to get the point. The plant, water. Your condition, sin. I mean, that's the way he's looking at it. There's another word picture that he uses, that is used here. And that is, we talked about this before when Job has said, it was earlier when he said, my days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle. And we made the point that in the context where it's like, well, the nights never pass. Will it ever be morning? And it's like the night is dragging on for eternity, and yet in the same context he talks about how quickly his life is passing away. And we ask the question, is that possible? And the answer is yes. I mean, sounds contradictory, but that's what Job is seeing, that the nights would seem so long, but his life is quickly passing by, and he refers to that here again in chapter 9. Look at verse 25. Now my days are swifter than a what? Than a runner. Now this isn't talking about somebody that, there's jogging and then there's running. You know, a jogger might say he runs a couple of miles. We know what that means. But a biblical runner that would be in training and running to deliver a post, deliver a message. I mean, these were fast as gazelles. I mean, they were fast. Fast as a runner. They flee away, they see no good. They pass like, verse 26, he uses another figure, pass like what? So here's a ship. You're seeing a ship and it just, it comes into view and you look at it, you see it there for a little while, and then you keep watching it, and what happens? It's gone. So it just comes into view and then it's gone. But then what's the next one? Like a what? Like an eagle? Is that a word picture? Is that a good word picture? By the way, I didn't take this picture. Does anybody know how fast an eagle can fly?
Probably 60 miles an hour.
Anybody know? If they're just flying along, like horizontally, 30 miles an hour. But that's not what the text says. It says, like an eagle swooping on its prey. The bald eagle has been clocked at 100 miles an hour, diving down for its prey. Now, how does he do that? Isn't it amazing how evolution has equipped him to do things like that, and not crash when he goes there and just swoop up in his talons? And by the way, this is a bald eagle. The gold eagle has been clocked at 150 miles an hour, going down for its prey. That's a word picture. You don't want to miss the word picture. I mean, what you could say is, my days are going by quickly. You could say that. But this is Hebrew poetry, as Thomas said. We're using word pictures. And so when you want to talk about how quickly your life is passing, like an eagle coming for its prey. So anyway, that's enough on that. I just wanted to share with you a couple of word pictures, if I may. Let's see what else we've got. We got our questions. Now, what I think I need some help unless I'd made a notation, and I did not. So I need help where to start on chapter 8, question number 1. Sue, are you the culprit? Are you the first one, or are you the last one? Which are you saying, Brother Freeman? All right. So, Thomas, would you please get us started?
What questions did Bildad the Shuhite ask Job? Whose God subverted?
Okay. Number 2 is next. Okay. And number 3.
Does Bildad suggest that maybe Job's children had sinned? Your sons sinned against him.
Yeah. He says he has cast them away for their transgression. Well, now, he puts it like that, Hank, but what in fact had happened to Job's sons and his daughters? How many of them? All of them, right? All of his sons and his daughters, a total of 10. All of them. Now, you can't say that to someone who's just lost all of his children and him think you're talking about somebody else, or him think you're just bringing up something for the sake of argument. Would you take that personally? Of course you would. If your sons have sinned against him, he has cast them away for their transgression. What has happened to his sons? They've died. Well, they've been cast away for their transgressions then. Can you see why Job would call these people miserable comforters? Can you see that? Okay, let's move on. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. We're at, no, that's not 1, 2, 3. Now we're at number 4. I'm having a little hard time hearing you. Okay. Yeah, seek God. Make your supplication to him. Of course, Job is already doing that. Number 5 is next. Okay. All right, number 6 is next. Okay. Now you can answer a lot of questions by your observation. You know, that's where Eliphaz started, wasn't it? According to what I've seen, he said. So you can answer some things by what you've seen. You can also appeal to what others have said. But does that answer everything? Does that give us everything we need? Our experience or that of others? Number 7 is next. Greg, did you want to take that one?
How does he speak of our days upon the earth, the former age, and consider the things discovered by the fathers?
You're in the wrong verse.
We were born yesterday and know nothing because our days on earth are a shadow.
Okay, now our days on earth are but a shadow. Well, when you're standing still and there's some light on you, either sun or artificial light, you do cast a shadow, don't you? But by the way, where is your shadow from yesterday? If you were out in the sun yesterday, where is that shadow? You know, if it were late in the day or early in the morning, you could even cast a long shadow. Have you noticed how long a shadow can be sometimes? But it's still gone. It's temporary, passing quickly. Number 8 is next. Okay. It's kind of a cause and effect thing, isn't it? If you have the effect, there must be an adequate cause. Number 9. He did. He's using those terms And as I said earlier, not just talking theoretically. Number 10 is next.
How are the wicked compared to the spider's web? It does not endure.
Okay, it is not substantial. Number 11 is next.
Did he say that God would cast away a perfect man? No.
He would not. Number 12 is next.
What did he say about
And again, that's this turnaround, if you will, if you'll just do what's right, your fortunes will be reversed. Okay? Anything else in chapter 8? Well, let's look at question number 13.
what question did Job ask?
So Job is speaking now. Number 14 is next. And number 15. Okay, good. All right, number 16 is next here. Okay. Again, if he takes away, who can hinder him? Okay. So number 17 is next. Okay. And we say that he said that in his desperation. Number 18 is next. All right, I could hear that. Julie?
What did Job say about his mouth? He said, my own mouth will be
Even if I were righteous. Number 19.
What was Job's life?
Okay. I despise my life. By the way, while you're open there, what does 7 and verse 16 say? Anybody? I loathe my life. Okay. All right, now on question number 20.
How does Job describe the passing of his days? The days are swift and the nights are long.
And number 21.
What was Job going for at this time? Mediator?
Okay, good. So as I say, we're catching up with questions left over from the 3 chapters covered last week. As we go to the next sheet of questions, Job 10. Now we have 7 questions on that, and then we'll kind of be caught up on our questions. So question number 1 on page 5.
Did Job say he would quit complaining?
Okay, number 2. Sandy, I'm having trouble hearing you. Would you say that again, please? Yeah, question number 2 on page 5. Okay, thank you. Number 3 is next. May I say, Brother Reed, that it is good to have you with us. Avery? Bill, we're up here with you.
Did you say that God knew he was wicked? No.
And number 4.
How did Job say the war was made? He put in his skin and flesh and didn't need to
and number 5.
What caused Job to be confused or distressed? I had no way to in myself or put myself
If I'm good, if I'm righteous, that doesn't seem to work. And if I'm wicked, that doesn't seem to work. It doesn't seem to make sense to me, you know, in terms of what I'm going through right now. Okay, number 6 is next.
Where did Job say he would have been carried? He should have been carried from the womb when he was born to the grave.
Yeah, from the womb to the grave. I was looking at I think it's the New American Standard, used an interesting expression. Instead of from the womb to the grave, what does that say there, Hank? Yeah. I'm not making light of that. That's really the idea, from the womb to the tomb. That's what he's saying. Number 7 is next there.
How does he refer to death, a land of darkness?
You know, Steve made the point some time back that what was known at this time about the future life. Brother Haley used to use this illustration. It's like when it starts getting daylight, you've got that little bit of light. Then the sun starts coming up. I reckon Raymond greets the sun every morning. Gets up for her while it's dark. You see that little bit of light, and then you reach that point that the sun is shining and it's blinding. It's just blaring. And Revelation was that way. It was progressive. You've got the twilight zone, and I don't mean like the television show. I mean as far as light is concerned. You've got the patriarchal dispensation, and the Mosaic dispensation, and then the Christian age, when you've got passages that tell us we have now all things pertaining to life and godliness. We've got the completed revelation, but it was progressive. There's a couple of things I wanted to say. Could I just to quickly say this? How long, and I know there's no definitive answer to this one, but for example, it was mentioned a while ago, Job has 7 sons and 3 daughters. Has he accumulated a lot of wealth in the first couple of chapters? Does he have a reputation for wisdom, helping people, being known by people around? So how old would you say he was in the first couple chapters there? I don't know, but how old would he have to be? At least what? All right, Bill is saying 50, 60, or 70. If you married young and had the children one after another, but you keep reading, though, about these children, if you started out young, but you read about these children, are these now grown children that have their own homes, and he's making sacrifice for them? So you've not only had children, but you have grown children. So how old would he be? Well, is that unreasonable? Say 50, 60, or 70 at that point? There's a minimum amount of time required to be married, have 10 children, and them be grown.
Be a man that's considered wise. I've always thought be about the age of Abraham when he first was him after he leaves toward the promise.
And at that point, he was 75. You don't think of a young person being known for his wisdom all across the land, do you? Now, why am I saying that? Well, one of the things that we've said about this time is how it fits in the patriarchal age. Now, go to the end of the book. Actually, I want to go to the end of the book for a couple of things. But the last 2 verses there in Job 42, who's got that? Job 42 and verse 16. Read for me.
After this, Job lived 140 years and saw his children and grandchildren for 4 generations.
Okay.
Job died old and full of age.
So whatever you start with, Bill, if you start with 60, Raymond said Abraham's age 75 when you're looking at, I mean, most people, if they had 10 children and the children were grown, would at least be around 60. That's not a bad guess. I think 50 would be on the young side. He might not have been 75. Who knows? But let's say it would sensibly require about 60 years. But at the end of the book, we're told that after all this, he then has more children. And he sees them to the fourth generation. That means his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, and his great-great-grandchildren. He sees them to the fourth generation. He lives 140 years after this. So if you use 60 as a reasonable starting point, and you add 140 that's added at the end of the book, because it plainly says, after this. See that in verse 16? After this. That means after all these things. So that places him at the age of 200, right there. Now let me ask you this. Do you know of anyone in the Bible, after the time of the patriarchs, that lived to be 200 years? In fact, by the time of Moses, what is Moses saying? Bobby, what is Moses saying in Psalm 90 and verse 10? The days of our lives are... There you go. So Moses is writing this, in the 15th century BC. And what he's saying is, by reason of strength, 80 years. In other words, on the average, 70 or 80 years. But they're soon gone, we fly away. So this longevity of life, I mean, before the flood, you've got these 900-year kind of lifetimes, right? But then after the flood, in the days of the patriarchs, you still have long lifetimes. You have people living 180 years, 110 years, well over 100 years, not uncommon. But after that, with the passing of a little bit of time, it's 70, 80 years, and that remains consistent. What is the average lifespan today? Yeah, 70-something years. I mean, that has remained consistent all that time. Sometimes it's a little bit less because of environmental conditions. But all things being equal, on the average, what's said there continues to be the case till now. So I wanted to share that with you because I'd not made that point yet. And I want you to be just like Bill was. Bill, do you mind if I tell this? See, after the first lesson, he was saying, now, how do we know this is in the patriarchal age? Well, I mean, I've taught that for years. Bob Waldron said so. And I was saying, well, Brother Haley said this. The consensus of scholars is on this. And Bill says, I don't go by consensus of scholars. Why do you think it's in the patriarchal age? So I said, let me get back with you on that. Well, this is not the only reason. There is vocabulary. The terms of money used, shekel, terms like that also fit the patriarchal age. But for me, this nails it. This is something internally, when you think about his lifespan, that, again, fits the patriarchal age. It does not fit any other time. Would you agree with that? It fits there. It doesn't fit any other time. Yes?
Would you also have to add more years for, like verse 13, you went on to have 10 more children? And then it says it was after this. So would that even make sense?
Possibly so. For sure, when verse 16 says after this, it could either be summarizing or it could even saying after the children are born. The point he goes ahead to make is he sees his children to the fourth generation. So that's possible. Okay, well, anyway, I want to say that. Well, there's another thing that we do want to keep in mind, and that is how that Job acknowledges. This will help us. Look with me to chapter 42 and verse 3. 42 and verse 3. Russell, would you read that for me, please?
You ask, who is this who finds counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know.
So I'd like for us, don't you think it's fair to use this passage? What's the word I'm looking for? To kind of moderate what Job says. In other words, if you think Job says something that, and you're tempted to say, well, why did he say that? Or if you're tempted to say, well, I sure wouldn't have said that. Ask yourself the question, could God entrust to you the position that he entrusted to Job? Are you that kind of person that God would have been willing to, as it were, risk his name and his glory on your behavior? That's the first thing to ask. But the second thing is, look at what he himself says. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry I said that. In fact, look at what he says in verse 6. Would you go ahead, Russell, and read that one as well?
Therefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes.
Okay, so we're going to read some passages along where it's like Job says this, and it seems hard on our ears. But keep in mind, first of all, what God says about Job. That's where you begin with. That's where you begin. And secondly, at the end of the book, he looks back. He acknowledges, yeah, I said things I should not have said. I said things that I'm sorry I said, and I repent of that. So that to me is what we want to keep in mind when we look at a particular passage and say, well, why did he feel that way? Or he shouldn't have said that. So we want to bear that in mind. Okay, so we've answered our questions on 8, 9, and 10. Now, when you're in chapter 10, that's Job's response. But now, for the first time, we've got our third speaker. And who is he? Anybody? Good. He is Zophar. So far, we have heard from Eliphaz and Bildad, and now we hear from Zophar. This is the third one. Now, those of you that have read ahead a little bit, we haven't covered chapter 11 yet, but if you've read ahead a little bit, are there any observations you would make about Zophar, comparing him to the other two friends? Anybody? Did you say he's a little rude? The others were kind of stern. It's like where there's smoke, there's fire, But Zophar, he's more direct. He is, instead of this entreaty, like we said that Eliphaz started out with, I don't know, did you ever hear the expression that, he jumped on him with both feet? It's that kind of situation. So let's look at chapter 11, please. Zophar the Naamathite. Shall the multitude of words be unanswered? Should a man full of talk be vindicated? Have you ever been called a windbag? You're just a bunch of hot air. So look at verse 3. Should your empty talk make men hold their peace? And when you mock, should no one rebuke you? Now let's just pause here and ask, in all fairness, Job has said some things like, I loathe my life. I wish I'd gone from the womb to the tomb. He said things like that in his pain. You remember how we described in detail in one lesson his pain? Just went through the book of Job looking at passages that described all the various symptoms. Remember that? So yes, he said some things, and some were rash, but I want to ask you this. Has Job actually mocked? Has Job mocked God? Has he been guilty of mockery? No, that's really unfair to say that. Well, you said my doctrine is pure and I am clean in your eyes. Well, but remember, has Job said he is sinless? Has he ever said that? What Job has said is, I do not believe that this has happened to me because of sin in my life. I don't believe God is punishing me with this calamity that has come. But he hasn't. It's not like he's been bragging about his righteousness. But look at Zophar though. Oh, that God would speak and open his lips against you. Boy, if he could speak. But the thing is, had God already spoken about Job? He has. And will God speak about Job into the book? He sure will. But be careful what you wish for. So far got his wish. And when God speaks, he's going to say, you three have not spoken what is right of me as my servant Job has. Now, Job's going to offer sacrifice on your behalf. That's what's going to be said when God speaks. He would show you the secrets of wisdom. They would double your prudence. Know therefore that God exacts from you less than your iniquity deserves. Now you talk about something cruel. Here's a man so emaciated that did his friends recognize him when they first saw him? His three friends when they got there? Didn't recognize him. Covered from head to the sole of his foot with boils that are oozing with infection, that flies have laid eggs that have maggots. He's in such pain, it's unbearable. And here Zophar says, God's punishing you a lot less than you deserve. You bear this in mind, Job. It's less than your iniquity deserves. So that's why I was asking that question before. Do you see some difference between the way he approaches it and the way the other friends? He is really cruel in what he says. He is more aggressive, and he's really more reckless in what he says. That had to be hurtful. And so can you search out the deep things of God and find the limits of the Almighty? Now here again, we're going to get into some areas, like Aaron said last time. A lot of what these men say is true. In other words, when they're talking about some of the attributes of God, the limits of the Almighty, verse 8, they're higher than the heavens. What can you do? Deeper than Sheol, what can you know? What can you know? Their measure is longer than the earth, broader than the sea. What's he talking about? The things of God, the wisdom of God, knowing about God. It's so great and vast we can't know it. Well, is that true? Is that true? He is infinite and all that? In all of these things, I should say. And in the 10th verse, if he passes by, imprisons, gathers to judgments, who can hinder him? But look at verse 11. Look at verse 11. Who wants to read verse 11 for me? Adam, you look like a likely suspect. Would you read verse 11 for me?
For he knows false men receive iniquity without investigation.
Now, again, do you think that Zophar is just kind of making a speech on the attributes of God and what he sees, or do you think he's talking about Job? Again, you have a context to measure these things in. He's talking about Job, isn't it? God knows everything, and he knows deceitful men. He knows wickedness. He knows wickedness. But I'll tell you what, one of the more unflattering things that's said in verse 12. Jonathan, would you read verse 12? Do you have your ESV with you? All right, read verse 12 for me.
But a stupid man will get understanding when a wild donkey's colt is born a man.
Wow. Now this is what you'd call a proverb. It's said as a proverb. So how often would a wild donkey, in your experience and in your research, how often would a wild donkey give birth to a man? Is that something? Well, yeah, I've heard, that once in a while that'll happen. No, that doesn't. It never happens. So what is the point? Well, you might say that's a word picture for sure. I'm not going to try to show a slide of that, by the way. But that's a word picture for sure. But he says, an empty-headed man will be wise when a wild donkey's colt has born a man. In your translation said a stupid man. Anybody have another translation? One that differs, from that. Hank, what does the NASB say? Idiot. Anybody not understand that word? Idiot. Now here again, do you think that Zophar is just kind of, well, here's some things, I thought about on this topic? Or is Job the stupid man? Is Job the idiot? Is he the empty-headed man? It's like, we're having so much trouble because you're so thick-headed. You are so stubborn. And this is futile. It's futile because An empty-headed man will be wise when a wild donkey's colt is born a man. So waiting on you to get this, Job, and to be wise and straighten up is about like waiting on a wild colt to give birth to a man. It's never going to happen. I mean, that just almost, that takes your breath away, doesn't it? That's pretty bad. But it's like, even if he said it's so hopeless, it's like he turns around, verse 13, and says, on the other hand, Andrew, would you read verse 13 for us?
If you would direct your heart right and spread out your hand to him.
And of course, he starts out that way and mentions, impurity in your hand, you put it far away, wickedness, don't let it dwell in your tents. And then you could lift up your face, verse 15, without spot, and you could be steadfast in fear, and you'd forget your misery. You wouldn't remember it anymore. It'd be like waters that have passed away. So even though he says it's not likely, I guess it's like, well, to be fair, for the sake of argument, if you just repent, there's still hope. Let me ask you this question. If you would prepare your heart and stretch out your hands toward him, tell me what that means, the stretching out of your hands. What's that talking about? Anybody? Well, repenting. What? Did I hear something else? Did you say prayer? Okay. That's really the idea. It's like what Paul said about the men in 1 Timothy chapter 2 when he said, I will therefore that the men pray in every place lifting up holy hands. And often this is a posture, well, not just prayer, but otherwise of the concept of directing one's heart to God. But the idea, if you just stretch out your hands to him. But this figure of speech a lot of times is associated with prayer. It denotes prayer. And that's probably what it's saying here. If you just prepare your heart, if you'd pray, put away this wickedness, then it would be well for you. Look at verse 17. Your life would be brighter than noonday, and though you were dark, you'd be like the morning, and you'd be secure, verse 18, because there's hope. And you'd lie down, verse 19. No one would make you afraid. But on the other hand, if you don't, what does verse 20 say? Who's ready with verse 20 for me? Wow, look at that. The eyes of the wicked will fail. In other words, if you don't do this, Job, not only will you not have all these good things to come to pass, but they shall not escape. And this is an interesting way to put it. In the New King James, it says, and their hope, and then it has a dash, and then it says, loss of life. Do you usually think of hope as being to breathe your last, that that's the thing you hope for? I mean, usually hope is when a person will live longer. Hope is for good things in life to happen. But he says their hope, loss of life. So I was doing some comparative translations. The New American Standard, their hope is to breathe their last. The Christian Standard, their only hope will be to die. The King James, their hope shall be as the giving up of the ghost. So, and the NIV, by the way, says, the eyes of the wicked will fail, the escape will elude them, their hope will become a dying gasp. Now that's a word picture, isn't it? A dying gasp, just breathing their last. That's the thing that they hope for. I don't know about you, but I think if I were Job and I'd had this fellow that pretended, well, not pretended, he's professing to be my friend. I think they really were his friends. They were there to see him. Is it possible to do more harm than good by what you say? Is there such a thing as a word fitly spoken that's like apples of gold and networks of silver? We can use our words to encourage and to build up, or here is Zophar. He's using his words like a butcher knife. It's just terrible. Okay, so we have covered chapter 11. We've answered our questions through 8 through 10. I've got another sheet to pass out. And that way we'll not only be caught up, but we'll be ahead with a few. You guys help me out here, please.